I think that was really beautiful.
You see being born from her the heavens. And in many ways, this becomes an image of the alien giving birth to this species that could devour the heavens. Newt represents the duat itself, the realm of the dead, the realm of night, the realm of the stars. This is where the sun goes every night. This is where the soul goes between life and death. We're in the alien's domain in this whole story.
The first I saw of the Alien script was an early version. Dan O'Bannon brought it to me, and as I recall, the original title was Star Beast. I liked the script, and I wanted to make it, but I said to Dan, this really requires a bigger budget than what I'm able to spend. Why don't you shop it around and see if you can get a big budget? If you can't get the big budget, come back to me and I will buy the script and make the picture.
And a guy called Mark Hager got this script into the pile at Walter Hill's office. And it must have been a day when Walter Hill was at a loose end. And he happened upon Star Beast. Now, he thought Star Beast was one of the worst scripts he'd ever read. He just thought it was awful, but he stopped. Page, whatever, 30, whatever it was, and went, what the hell?
When Brandywine showed interest and optioned Alien, Dan was, of course, being a pest and insistent that they use Giger for the creature. This is a letter to Giger from Dan, dated July 1st, 1977. Dear Giger, this week I've moved into offices of Brandywine Productions, where we are beginning to make the design decisions for our film. The producers, Gordon Carroll and David Geiler, and the director, Walter Hill, are as excited as I am about the possibilities of your lending your unique talents to our picture. Look over the enclosed description of the designs we need, then let us know how much you would ask for the paintings involved. When we agree, we send you a check for $1,000 as an advance against future payments. Yeah, well, Brandywine didn't want to pay the $1,000, so Dan sent him a personal check for $1,000.
The face hugger, that was my first thing I did for Dan O'Bannon. He gives me explanation and drawings, and he said that he's jumping on a big egg. This egg is about that, so. And I thought that must be quite a big monster, so I did an enormous face hugger, and he was jumping. I thought he could jump when his tail is like, it's curved like a spring devil or the Jack in the Box.
And from those sketches, he went ahead and did the paintings. And that's why the paintings say Dan O'Bannon's Alien, because Dan paid for them.
Fox hierarchy come in to see some of the designs, and they fired him. Gordon Carroll found and said, this guy is just sick, get him off our lot. Send him back to Switzerland, we're having none of it. So Giger was gone.
Fox is full speed ahead with Brandywine. They're in pre-production, Walter Hill's gonna direct the phone, and all of a sudden the studio gets a call from Walter Hill, basically where he says, yeah, I'm not gonna make this movie. I never really believed in it, I don't think it's that great, and I got another picture I'm gonna do here, so good luck, I'm out. And that other picture was Southern Comfort. Not a bad movie, not Alien.
I read the script and I thought, well, this is very solid, very interesting. It's not really an actor's script. There was no one else attached, and they were asking me to get involved in what was then a budgeted film for $2 million. That $2 million sounds like an Ed Wood movie. So I turned it down.
Ridley and I had just finished off The Duelist. There was this thing between Ridley and I about sci-fi, and that I was the sci-fi fanatic. And all the films that I used to show him, he would completely disparage and say, no, it's a pile of shit. He had this script through the door called The Alien, and I tried to say, well, let me read it, etc. And for some reason or other, this time he said, no, I'll read it first. And so he was in the next door office where we made commercials, and I remember him sitting there going, fuck me.
I got a call a few weeks later, and they said, well, the budget's up to $10 million, and a director named Ridley Scott is going to direct it. I said, sold.
I got a phone call from Ridley saying, get your backside down to Shepperton now. So I drove straight down there.
When Brandywine brought Ridley on was when Dan really got an ally in a lot of what he wanted for Alien to be. Very, very rare occurrence when the writer can have that amount of influence.
We thought he was going to be the wrong director for it, and he turned out to be the greatest visual stylist since Kubrick's prime.
And he's such a visual guy that the first thing he did was kind of break it down into storyboards. He draws his own storyboards, extraordinary artist. He's fantastic images. But what it doesn't really have is a clear idea of the alien. It's not quite there. And Bannon says, look, I've got this book.
When Dan showed Ridley the Necronomicon, Ridley instantly said, yes, this is it.
I was shown the book, Necronomicon, okay, in Los Angeles, in fact by O'Bannon, who brought it in. And I nearly fell off the desk, said, that's it, and why look farther? And so that's how I saw it. It was as simple as that. I've never been so certain about anything in my life.
There were many arguments at that stage. Fox were probably quite troubled, but it was an early sign of how strong Scott was on that film, that he won so many battles. And the most fundamental and important one was he got Giger back on.
I just thought it was stunning, and I just stuck to my guns saying, no, that's it. And they said, but let's bring him in and talk some concepts. I said, no, you can't do that. That's it. We want to be shooting by so-and-so. That's it. Just to get this right is going to be incredibly difficult. This is beautiful, not just threatening, and also has very sexual connotations. So in everything, it's like a rather beautiful humanoid, biomechanoid insect.
Giger talks about intentionally drawing imagery from his own dreams. That means it's coming from a place where he didn't have agency over what came to him.
When he painted, he was in a sort of trance. He was possessed like a seer, a blind seer. Would go like that, and like in a Polaroid, an image would appear and take shape.
Giger's images existed in a universe of their own in Switzerland, and they really found their place in space, the xenomorph and the space jockey. Giger's images really found a home in Alien.
Part of what you're seeing with the character of Alien is this gorgeous synchrony, this incredible synthesis of multiple mythological characters. Sekhmet, Pazuzu, Kali.
You can see the medieval dragon, the Renaissance demons, the work of Hieronymus Bosch.
And it's a synthesis that wasn't done consciously. It was a synthesis that happened in the cauldron of stories that was Giger's imagination. This is a character with which all three of these artists identified. And because they all resonated with this pattern, they were drawn together. This coming from a much deeper place.
Such a brilliant choice that, in the end, you could say separates Alien from anything else, because you've got this extraordinary artist with this sort of mind-blowing imagery, and you injected it straight into the film.
In the hands of perhaps an aficionado who loved horror movies and science fiction, it might have turned out to be a completely different movie.
The triptych of Dan O'Bannon, Ridley Scott, and Hans-Ruedi Giger was the gift from the gods.
They were on the same wavelength, and they were all thinking about this as more than a science fiction adventure into the future. This was just as much an exploration of the ancient past, of the repressed and forgotten that the alien represents. When a story comes from multiple people, and beyond the agency of multiple people, it has a special existence.
It is a symbiosis. Alien is a symbiosis of a few people who had that sensibility. Dan had gone off and been in charge, it would have been a different film. It would have had more of the dark star You know, Ron Cobb would have been pure sci-fi, all perfectly done, more Star Trek-y in a way, or 2001. I came on board and made everything look grungy and real and like a space truck, you know. Alien, I always say we got the sets right. The audience didn't ever question that we just found some old spacecraft and gone in and filmed in it. That was different to the world that had gone before. There was Robbie the Robot, there was Barbarella.
It's both very tangible and a completely different world at the same time. There's something almost perennial about the way that, yes, those ships are a completely different environment from what we're used to now and what we would have seen 1,000 years ago, but human beings haven't changed and they still behave in the same way.
I placed the hub of the wheel at Ridley because he's a visionary and he knew what to do with this film and how to marshal all of these different elements into Alien.
He was running the camera, doing a lot of the lighting. Everything was going on at once, and he was just conducting it so splendidly.
Ridley shot, yeah, good 80% of the film, and it was a Panavision camera. I mean, these aren't light, you know, and he wanted anamorphic on purpose. We were contained in a space, and that wide-angled lens made it seem much more claustrophobic. The costume designer who worked with Ridley always said to me once, you know, Ridley's got a camera for a head. He knows where to put the camera automatically. When you're handheld, you're breathing with the actors, you're just part of what you're filming, you're not distant. I think it's one of the best operated films ever seen. It's not wobbly cam, it was very beautifully photographed.
The great opening sequences where the camera drifts through the empty Nostromo, and you have this wonderful sense of movement in the frame. Even though they're all in their cryo chambers, there's a strange sense of life about the vessel. It's all kind of presaging what's coming, but it's a haunted quality, that flutter in the frame. And he talks a lot about the fact that he never let the camera sit still, that it has to keep moving because you want the audience on edge the whole time. You never let the film settle down. And even around the scenes where they're kind of just having these kind of rather sort of squabbling sequences between the crew, just normal ship stuff, there's a slight air of agitation about how he frames it and how he moves the camera. So he's getting what he calls the heartbeat of the film, this kind of growing throb that it has.
The reason he wanted the ship in one path was he wanted to film like the Mary Celeste at the opening. He was tracking round the ship, and there were eerie little things going on, the pecking birds that I put in there for Ridley, and everyone said, you can't do that. I thought it was a great idea.
The nodding thing, yeah, that was a Ridleyism. The little nodding things, he had a thing about that for whatever reason, back from childhood.
I loved it.
They were in all the cars in England. Everyone had these blooming things that were nodding, and they was always a joke. You know, America had dice hanging and stuff, but England had these nodding birds. It's perpetual motion. How do you illustrate that this thing is just carrying on and there's no human beings on it? It just worked to me, and that quiet kind of going around the ship and the eeriness of it, to me, said a lot. The little papers rustling.
It's all illogical. What would make these pages flit around? Where's the wind coming from? All that stuff.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense, but it did.
Yeah.
You know, it was like Ridley's vision.
His eye prevails over, perhaps, he'll forgive me saying, the scientific logic of something, which is hence why we had rain pissing down when Brett gets killed in that sort of, you know, chain hanging room. And I had several discussions, you know, having worked on 2001, where everything was meticulous and real, but rain in space, you know,
so
where's it coming from? He said, I don't care, it looks great.
It does, it does.
That was it.
The thing that we got from Ben Burt, we got this sort of ooh, ooh, that kept going throughout the film.
It was almost like a breathing, a sort of an alien breath, breathing in, exhaling and inhaling. And I think it gave a kind of just a kind of feeling that something was breathing down your neck all the time. It kind of gave an organic feel to the ship.
And then that computer chatter that comes on in the helmet, it makes you think, what's going on here? Everything that Ridley built up was building on this fear of the unknown, of something happening.
Everybody's now waiting for something to happen, but it doesn't. When I started working on the film, I just realized that this film was going to be virtually in slow motion. Everything was slow, except for these stabs that you got at various points. And you thought to yourself, how can I sort of push someone into a corner from the editing point of view, and how far do you go before the audience says enough's enough?
There was a lot of, I think, studio concern about the fact that it was 45 minutes before anything, in their opinion, happened.
Yeah.
Before the facehugger jumps out of the egg and hits John Hurt on the old visage.
But that was its strength.
Indeed.
It really was its strength to be able to hold it back that long before you really gave it to the audience.
Yeah.
They all found it very hard to cope with that.
Dan O'Bannon had conceptualized very early on in his script that they wouldn't find the eggs in the derelict spacecraft. They would find the space jockey. Extraordinary vision, and it came from Giger. It was a Giger picture. And it did something brilliant in the sense that it showed you that the universe was extraordinary. It was haunting. It was almost slightly benign. You felt almost sort of a loss when you saw it. It was a kind of creature ossified to a chair. You never quite understood what was creature, what was chair, and it was just brilliant. It's another thing that Scott had to fight for, because Fox just went, well, it doesn't have any plot function, you know, they just go through the floor and find the eggs. But he said, you can't just have a hole in the ground. You've got to suggest something. In the chest of what was then the space jockey, which we now know to be the engineer, there's a hole.
Bones had been outward, like he exploded from inside.
So you get an sense of what, there's a hint, a tiny little drop of maybe what these things do. And they lower Kane in on a kind of winch.
Can you see anything?
I don't know, a cave. A cave of some sort, but I don't know, but it's like the goddamn tropics in here.
And he sees in there this great sort of tableau that Giger had actually painted.
And we got onto that set and saw what they had done. I mean, it was mind-boggling. Everything was actual size. There was no CGI. So you were inside of these big, huge caverns that looked like big vaginas, you know. I mean, everything had a sort of a very sexual orientation.
So you've landed on the planet and you've had this ethereal sequence. Kane is almost guided by a signal. Some voice is calling him onward. And it's kind of wonderful to think that there's something there, you know, that the alien spacecraft is calling him. We get finally to the belly of the derelict and we get the egg chamber. That's the wake-up moment. That the whole tactic of the beginning, the openness and the kind of hauntingness, suddenly sort of gets sucked inward. Up until that point, the film has been a kind of a strange hybrid between a Kubrickian serious science fiction and this almost kind of fairy tale-like atmosphere, this kind of strange sort of hauntingness. It's not, strictly speaking, entirely realistic up until the point they have dinner. The chest burster changes the complexion of the film from a kind of epic to a kind of horribly, horribly intimate and sort of claustrophobic and inward. It's kind of an inward movement, even though the creature comes out of him. Suddenly everybody's trapped. Suddenly the spaceship is small and confined, where before it had been this kind of vast vessel. And what the film does is make that hyperleap jump into a primal survival story about many more things than we realize.
Ridley always says that this was the scene that stood out, that would make or break the film.
It was just some craziness that came out of Ron Shusett and Dan O'Bannon's mind. When you read it in the script, there's so many different ways to approach it. And Ridley was so constrained with the scene. It's a very significant moment in film history.
The idea came from a painting from Francis Bacon. Ridley Scott told me that this painting, it's just a crucifixion, and one of the member has just teeth and red flesh, and he liked to have the chest burster like that.
I've always been very moved by the movements of the mouth and the shape of the mouth and the teeth, and I like the, you may say, the glitter and color that comes from the mouth. When I first went to Paris, I found in an old bookshop a book on diseases of the mouth. The plates were hand-colored, and it had a tremendous effect on me.
The three studies for figures at the base of a crucifixion is the real point of departure for Bacon. He thought of that picture as his first picture. He was 35, and that's late, of course, for an artist to have a first work. This is his breakthrough work, and it's full of contradictions, full of paradoxes. How did suddenly this enormously challenging, unbelievably horrific and ugly imagery arise? The imagery is Christian, and Bacon, even by then, was a very violent atheist. You get the crucifixion in the title, but it is a mixture of Greek myth and Christianity. The Greek influence was very deep, and I think he thought of himself as somebody hounded by furies. And I think he felt their talons in his flesh. He said, "Oh yes, the furies visit me very often."
The Temple of Apollo at Delphi was one of the major sanctuaries of the Greek world. It is really important in the story of the Furies. The Furies in Greek mythology are avengers of crimes usually committed by children against their parents. And they first appear in Aeschylus's trilogy when Orestes murders his mother, Clytemnestra, and her lover, Aegisthus. When Orestes finds refuge at the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, the ghost of Clytemnestra tries to wake them up and rouse them so that they can fulfill their purpose, which is to hound down Orestes and take revenge for Clytemnestra's murder.
The violence of Aeschylus brings up the images. I mean, if you remember that wonderful translation of one of his lines, "The reek of human blood smiles out at me." Well, what could be more amazing than that? It immediately brings up the most astonishing images.
The Furies are a common torment to a creator, and here's why. To create is inherently a rebellion against creation.
The fact that his father kicked him out of the house when he discovered he was homosexual was a lasting wound in Bacon. I think the Furies, to some extent, are actually his father pursuing him, chasing him out of the family home and branding him as an outsider. This image came fully formed out of Bacon's imagination. It's like Athena springing fully formed from the head of Zeus. I see it as a monster coming out of Bacon and a monster coming out of the world.
Myths are thought to be messages from the divine. When Ridley Scott puts this image of Bacon into Giger's hands, that's an odd synchronicity. And when you see the importance of the story, and you're looking back on it with the power and magnitude with which that story landed, all the synchronicities that brought it to that point seem all the more important and stunning.
It's crazy that these scenes that are a word I hate using, but that are so iconic. It seems like the page should be, obviously there should be like the Constitution, right? I mean, at some point at the end of Citizen Kane, it says, and the camera turns and focuses, and it's a sled, rosebud, fade to black, right? It's not like, you think it should go ta-da, right? But the chestburster scene is just a one-page description. Broussard's face is screwed up into a mask of agony, and he's trembling violently from head to foot. There's an incoherent shriek from Broussard. Oh my God! A red smear of blood blossoms on the chest of Broussard's tunic. Their eyes are all riveted to Broussard's chest as the fabric of his tunic is ripped open, and a horrible, nasty little head the size of a man's fist pushes out. Everybody screams and leaps back from the table. The cat spits and bolts. The disgusting little head lunges, comes spurting out of Broussard's chest, trailing a thick, worm-like tail, splattering fluids and blood, lands in the middle of the dishes and food on the table, and scurries away while the men are stampeding for safe ground. When they finally regain control of themselves, it has escaped. Broussard lies slumped in his chair, a huge hole in his chest, spouting blood. The dishes are scattered, and the food is covered with blood and slime. I'd make that movie. Yeah.
The chestburster made everything possible for us. It wouldn't have been the magic it was without the chestburster scene.
Everything rested on that scene from beginning to end, from getting the film made, to how the audience respond, to whether those monsters continue to live in our imagination today. It's that moment where we finally assert that science fiction isn't only about minds, it's about our bodies. It's continuous with the directions horror was taking over the preceding decade, right? Horror is moving toward body horror through David Cronenberg in particular. It's part of the texture of a film that to me is one of the most tactile movies ever made. The sense of goo and grime, of things spurting at us, the sense of heat and steam and sweat. There's a tendency to think about the chestburster sequence as a scene or even a moment, but it really takes a while to build up to it.
The Nostromo moving in. It's funny, isn't it, how all these, outer space shots now have a certain sort of generalization about them. When you think about 2001, how gobsmacking that was at the time, and now we just take it all completely for granted.
Why is it called the Nostromo? The shuttlecraft is called the Narcissus. Narcissus and Nostromo are both words that are used in book titles by Joseph Conrad, who wrote about the evils of imperialism. By allusion to the works of Conrad, there's a strand within Alien which is about a concern as to what humanity might find as it ventures into the dark places. In the case of Conrad, he's thinking about the heart of darkness, the dark places of empire. At this same moment that Ridley Scott is making Alien, you have Francis Ford Coppola adapting Heart of Darkness to be Apocalypse Now and explicitly commenting on parallels between the Vietnam War and the encounter with evil in the British and Belgian Empire. Alien directs our attention or reminds us of the dangers of imperialism and conquest of other places, what we might find in these uncharted regions, especially if we attempt to exploit those regions.
Well, I hate to bring this up, but this is a commercial ship, not a rescue ship.
Right.
And it's not my contract to do this kind of duty.
The 1970s was a time of economic downturn, of threat coming from new places.
Ash, can you see this?
Yes, I can. I've never seen anything like it.
Particularly the first stirrings of terrorism. There were enemies within, there was political corruption. People had doubts, were feeling isolated, were feeling disillusioned.
I said that we abandon the ship. We get the shuttle and just get the hell out of here. We take our chances and just hope that somebody picks us up.
This is a consequence of Watergate, this is a consequence of the Vietnam War, this is a consequence of the political corruption in Europe, and I think that that uncertainty plays out in all kinds of movies from that period.
If you look at 78, you get Ted Bundy's captured, John Wayne Gacy's captured, the Hillside Stranglers out there, so there's this kind of new phenomenon out there, right? The serial killer, and what does that mean? There's this kind of idea that there's something out there that can be completely evil and illogical and horrible, and there's no reasoning with it, and there's nothing you can do to really stop it.
At no point in the Alien movies, and definitely not in the first one, do you feel like what makes us human is the thing that allows us to beat this creature.
I admire its purity. Survivor. And I will cloud it by conscience, remorse, or delusions of morality.
There is a commentary in there about the way that things are going right now and about what we're doing as human beings and how we're taking those strengths and those emotions, those things that make us human, and we're turning our back on them.
You have in the 1970s tremendous fear over what's happening to the American family.
And I don't love you anymore.
Where are you going? I don't know.
Panic about divorce, panic about family breakdowns.
Here's what I still don't understand. All the time, where are you running? All the times I come over here, I can't understand how you can prefer her to me.
You can't understand that?
No.
Well, you knew my history when you married me.
I think you can see that the crew of the spaceship operate like a kind of family, and there are sort of family-type tensions between them.
Before we dock, I think we ought to discuss the bonus situation.
Right.
Brett and I, we think we ought to...
One of the things that strikes me about this movie in general is the way that it's connecting what's gonna happen with 80s movies and what has happened in 70s movies, because sonically, it feels like a Robert Altman movie. You have the scene of all of these characters sitting around talking before they find out that Kane is okay.
Well, how about a little something to lower your spirits?
Show me, will you, please?
The way that it's blocked and staged, 5 or 6 people in the frame who are all doing something.
Just give me the short version.
People talking on top of each other at once at equal volumes, where you have to sort of decide who you want to listen to, and they're all mumbling and talking extremely naturalistically.
Just a little bit. Thank you. What happened to this guy?
It's doing the thing that cinema in America was doing in the 70s, which was to try to point the lens at a more naturalistic, working class reality of America. The future of blue collar workers is something that's wholly revolutionary, and the movie in a way is about that. It's about the exploitation of these blue-collar workers by the corporation.
Hey, Ripley, I want to ask you a question. If they find what they're looking for out there, does that mean we get full shares?
Don't worry, Parker, yeah. You'll get whatever's coming to you.
Look, I'm not going to do any more work. We get this straightened out.
Alien, to me, makes more sense if it were made in 1974, 75, 76 than after Star Wars. Alien is a smaller movie. Alien, I can't believe I'm saying this, is a realistic movie.
Part of it was just getting away from that sanitized view of space that had dominated science fiction from the 60s and for much of the 70s, and coming to something that felt like a real lived-in environment. It was continuous with the world we knew outside the movie theater.
Harry Dean Stanton and Yaphet Kotto are the 2 most working class guys on this ship, and they unwittingly maybe, but maybe intuitively know that if they just freeze Kane, everything's gonna be okay.
How come they don't freeze him? How come you guys don't freeze him? What I think we should do is just freeze him. I mean, if he's got a disease, why don't we stop it where it is? You can always get to the doctor when we get back home.
Right. They're speaking the truth in this kind of almost Greek chorus kind of prophet way, but nobody really wants to listen to them, and they're just making fun of them.
Whenever he says anything, you say, right, Brett, you know that?
Right. When what they're making fun of them for is that Harry Dean Stanton keeps saying, right, 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 but it's because they are right. And in the staging of this scene, Dallas, the ship captain, is sitting closest to us, and there's this wall of the two working class guys between him and the two women who are scientists and flight officers. And when he gets frustrated with this sense that, even jokingly, his authority is being undermined by these two guys who are his employees, he crosses to the far depth of the shot to talk to Lambert, who immediately starts talking in this sort of elevated, educated way.
Well, according to my calculations, based on time spent getting to and from the planet.
Just give me the short version. How far to Earth?
10 months.
And you can really see visually, in this incredibly subtle way, that there really is this war about the movement between the classes on the ship and who has the right to be heard.
Right.
We now know that Hollywood in the 1970s was a very oppressive place for women.
Do you find, in fact, that this, what could be best described as your equipment, in fact, hinders you, perhaps, in that?
You think about the sexism, the misogyny that was implicit within the industry that made this film.
You mean my fingers?
No, I meant your...
Come on, spit it out.
I meant your figure.
My figure.
And there's no way of looking at Alien without seeing it as a male fantasy of the kind of oppression that had been being handed out to women over the centuries, a guilt that was part of masculinity in the 1970s and should be part of masculinity now. Alien has within it fantasies of male pregnancy, fantasies of male rape, fantasies of male penetration, and it's all tied up with that amazing chest burster scene.
I don't know how explicitly they realized what they were doing. I can't imagine that any studio would be like, yes, you're making a male rape movie in space, for sure, let's go for it. It's wonderful that the unconscious works in so many mysterious ways.
It feels like a summoning in a major way, an accidental awakening of some repressed spirit. The Furies certainly speak for the repressed feminine, and Alien certainly represents the repressed feminine's retribution.
Alien touched a nerve with a lot of people because it was talking about something that even in 2019, we're still not comfortable addressing. The idea that Alien is addressing the guilt that a patriarchal society feels makes perfect sense to me.
We'll move in pairs. We'll go step by step and cut off every bulkhead and every vent until we have it cornered, and then we'll blow it the fuck out into space. Is that acceptable to you?
Ripley was creating in 1979, and it's insane that we don't have that many great female characters since, and especially in a genre like horror that's given so many female characters throughout time, and yet there's not one that strikes us as being as developed and as complex and as interesting as Ripley was. And isn't it ironic that she ends up being that way because she was written to be a man?
Ripley is the only maternal character within her Promethean crew. Her transformation gives us direction for the transformation that we need to take as a culture to avoid self-destruction. She's a new example.
When we start off this sequence with Kane, this very strange shot that's low angle and he's all the way to the side.
And maybe at that point, you know, for want of a better term, there's something's been buried inside you, something's been planted in your brain and you're not sure what.
How you doing?
Kane seems all right, he's even smiling a bit. He's not at his best, but he's looking a bit peaky, but he's starting to kind of cough. Before you realize what really happens, your brain is already ahead of you. Your brain is going, it's in him, and it's coming out.
One thing that he's certainly taking advantage of is the incredible width of the anamorphic frame. The entire cast is in this one wide shot. What could be safer than every single cast member in a brightly lit white room in a horror movie?
Everything in that ship is so dark. I mean, the light Ridley Scott uses is literally the light from the torches. That's it, right? But that scene, oh my God, you could operate in that scene, and you needed to operate in that scene, but they couldn't save the patient.
You go to Ash's reaction, I think that really the key to the tension here is tracking Ash, because he's always in opposition to everybody else. It's a very short shot and you wouldn't notice it the first time, but when you go back and rewatch it, you realize he knows that this is gonna happen. There's so many more single one-shots of him in this very strange off-kilter framing that really gives him this sinister surveillance kind of vibe, whereas most of the other characters, you're seeing them in groups because they're all on the same team. You believe that this is because he has a better intuition than the rest of them about how dangerous it is and he's trying to protect them, but in fact, he's trying to protect this baby monster that he's allowed to come into the world.
This son of a bitch is huge. I mean, it's like a man, it's big.
Kane's son.
Ash is such a dick.
Ash, are you receiving?
When you think about it, he's not an authentic being. So someone, a human person, had to program him, educate him. Not only is he supposed to look like a person, he's supposed to pass as a person because the crew didn't know. And that's what makes him the worst. That misogyny was built in.
Could kill him.
Ash looks at Dallas like, what do you think?
I won't even take their chances. Cut it off now.
You take responsibility?
Yes, I'll take responsibility. Get him out of it.
Ripley, on the other hand, is saying, I am making this call. It's my job to make this call.
Ripley, this is an order. You hear me?
Yes, I read you. The answer is negative.
In the hatch open.
And he says, nope, that's not gonna happen. I override you. Where does he get the idea to penetrate this woman forcibly? You know, that it doesn't logically make sense for an artificial life form to do that. He would choke her. He would suffocate her. The final choice that he makes is to just put this woman in her place. The programming, if we think about that, if we really unpack that, it's so frustrating. Oh, I hate him.
Another thing that I think about is the tradition of dramatizations that happen over dinners, which you can see in anything from Chekhov to Ibsen, going back to Shakespeare, and I can't help but think of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and in this case, it's the alien who's coming to dinner and shreds the social fabric of the dinner table. Both the text and the subtext is totally about food, right?
And the first thing that I'm going to do when I get back is to get some decent food.
I can dig it, man. I'm telling you, I've eaten bird food.
Even when it cuts to there's this shot across the table, and you can see the cat in the background, soft focus, it's eating dinner too.
Well, you just you know what it's made of.
No, Dad. I don't want to talk about what it's made of. I'm eating this.
What's the food made of? It's made out of your fucking insides of your body. And there's just this cluster of noise, and it's almost like you're hearing it from the point of view of the chest burster. It's inside of Kane.
To me, Ridley's really pulling a Kubrick here. You see this in Clockwork Orange, you see this in Barry Lyndon. In all of these movies, you have Kubrick approaching sets and characters with a very squared off and rigid formal style. But when violence happens, Kubrick will drastically change the kind of visual vocabulary of the scene.
It's this amazing choice to not see Kane's face at the very moment that he's going through the most agony. It's incredibly unnerving, and it's sort of a taste of what's about to happen 25 seconds later when it becomes one of the messiest scenes in film history.
Slow, Roger, and blood push out. It was kind of looming at us, this scene. You know, everyone was a bit worried about it, for sure, because A, it's never been done before, and there was so much preparation around it.
Like much of the design work for the film, it had taken a long while to get to where they were, and I don't know how fully satisfied Ridley was. I think the egg and the facehugger worked very clearly for him. He loved the kind of witch's fingers element of the facehugger, the slightly kind of sort of insectile nature of it. But the chestburster was difficult because it had to appear childlike. It had all these kind of functions. It had to be able to come out of his chest. It had to suggest the creature to come. So in a way, the design of the chestburster was governed most, I think, by function and practicality, the need of the sequence, as much by the flamboyance of Giger's work and Scott's desire to create something extraordinary.
They couldn't solve the look of it. Giger had a go at the chest burster, and he says he never got it right. It wasn't working.
I did some design. They look like chicken, something like chicken without feather, but I was not happy with. And then build up the thing, and it looked like a small dinosaur.
They had versions that could look like a turkey that had been sort of plucked, that just were laughable. They couldn't sort of come up with something that was genuinely terrifying in its own right.
Roger Deakins went away and developed it on his own. He was able to make it work.
They had made this little puppet, frankly, it looked like a penis, and with teeth, and they had they said, and we're going to have it so that it'll just blow up, and then these teeth will come out. They were like describing this. It was just a thing. And we were going, oh, okay. I mean, they were so excited, these puppeteer people. It was just hysterical.
The fundamental myth of the chest burster sequence is that the cast didn't know. Of course, this isn't quite true.
We knew that there was going to be a chest burster scene. We just didn't know how it was going to be done.
John Hurt obviously knew, so they just kept him plied with red wine and cigarettes all day long. They knew they were relying on his patience to stay in that position while everything was set up.
The atmosphere on the set had a certain frisson, you know, in the morning, because everybody knew that this was filmically a sort of major scene. I don't think anybody had any idea that it would become a kind of film classic.
Roger Deakins brought the chest burster to the set in a carrier bag. Blood was being loaded. All the crew was sort of donning these rain jackets because they kind of knew what was coming.
In the morning, Ridley said, let's put some bits of gristle and stuff, so I sent the buyer down to the abattoir to buy a load of offal, which stank terrible. And they put it in formaldehyde for you, but it was worse. But we packed it round, and Ridley was doing it himself too. We were sticking it all around underneath.
We're all up in our dressing rooms at Shepperton Studios. Harry Dean Stanton is sitting in the hall singing and playing guitar. We're up there for hours. We kept wondering what was going on.
But at a certain point in time, some assistant is sent to bring them to set. And what greets them isn't a vision, it's a smell. Because over these hours, this kind of offal and raspberry juice has just been cooking under the lights.
Literally, you gagged when you walked onto the set. It was so disgusting.
Ridley wasn't certain how that was going to happen. How's it going to manifest? All this innards of a cow and the blood, and thinking, my.
What they saw was John Hurt spread out on this table with all of these hoses. Everybody is covered up in suits. The actors walk in and they see that waiting for them. And I saw them, their faces all sort of dropped. They all sort of went like this, and their eyes got big and roamed around all over this stuff.
We started to shoot the scene, and I was told I'd get a little blood on me. So we start to roll.
And then what happens is brilliant. It's just this splat, almost like a bullet has hit him. He puts a pause in. You've got to kind of give the audience a chance to realize what's happened.
The whole thing was really a trick in the cut, and there was a cut to the other side of the table by which time I had been replaced by a replica body.
His T-shirt pulled, tightly on it, and in there's going to be bloodlines on high pressure pumps. They're going to blow blood everywhere.
So we start to roll, and then all of a sudden Ridley shouts, "Cut, cut!"
It didn't work on the first take. There wasn't much of a chest burster, really. It couldn't get through the damn T-shirt.
Well, we found ourselves all leaning in to see what the hell was going on.
Second time, it still didn't go through, but it came up like that and then went down and covered in blood, and the actors were all kind of looking like that and curious, so it was a stroke of genius that it went wrong. They still didn't know what was coming, and it reset again. Really just said to Nick Alder and to Roger Deakins, just get it through this time. And they added more blood, more pipelines.
And this thing goes up through, splat, and they fire all the pumps.
when it went through, I mean, that blood just went everywhere.
It was just exactly what Scott wanted. It was just this absolute immediate visceral response.
When it happened, of course, it stills you. So that's how it manifests, huh?
And again, Nick, and again! Come on!
I had leaned into a blood jet. That little blood shot me square in the face. And that's when I jumped back and I went, oh my God. And my knees hit the back of this banquette where we were all sitting, and it flipped me upside down. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're still shooting. So I rolled over and I got back up and I ran around and got back into the scene.
So there were different reactions to it.
And action. Blood. Blood. No. Push it out. Pump it.
You know, Roger Dickens had built little lungs in as well. There was a lot of stuff going on under the table to make it look so real. Hung bits of stuff all over it so that it looked like it broke through the flesh and heart and muscles. That was part of Ridley wanting this to be unquestionably real. And I think that scream, when it screams, there's the bacon shot. There's something really strange in those paintings that connects to the phobias that we carry with us to this day, and they come from our ancient past. So I think, you know, particularly the incubus is one that struck me when I read.
I feel like Ridley Scott can't find a better way to talk about his own mortality than by going back over and over to the origin site of the height of his powers and the height of his creativity.
If you look at where Ridley Scott is currently taking the Alien cycle, he's using it explicitly to explore questions of where did life come from? What does it mean to be human? He seems fascinated by the idea that the child would destroy the parent, that the created would destroy the creator, that things we make come back and destroy us, which I suppose are variations on the Frankenstein story, but the repeated recurrence of this in his work suggests, I think, a major artistic obsession, actually. People often talk of Hollywood as the dream factory, but I think the dreams that Hollywood puts on the screens are not just the dream of one person, they're collective dreams. Cinema is a window on our collective unconscious, and in that way, I think that Alien is an incredibly important window on what people were thinking about as of the late 1970s.
When you look back at Alien 40 years later, it seems prophetic of where we've gone.
We're still going in the same direction that it seemed to be indicating at the time, which makes the world of Alien, if not probable, at least, you know, looking like a possibility in the way that Star Wars could never be.
The last act of Alien is escaping self-destruction. That's the myth of our times. Part of what makes Alien so powerful is it's so much more than an allegory. It taps into a deep set of patterns that can mean many, many, many things. I don't think we can get to the bottom of Alien. Like a piece of sand vibrating in a somatic experiment in touch with something deeper. Dan O'Bannon must have been on the frequency for this myth. He seems to have been a stenograph for a larger song.
My husband was out of time in a way, you know, out of specific time. But he lives on. And when he was dying, that's what I said to him. He was not conscious. But I said, you moved the world. You did it, you moved the world. And he did. In a way, I don't think Dan O'Bannon is finished yet. When he died, I had a strange feeling that he'd gone back to the future from whence he'd come. And there's still things there that are emerging from him and things that I have that are just now becoming relevant today. And there's more there. There's more there. Don't ask me why he had this connection to the past and the future, but he sure did. He came from a place that had no telephone or television and went to the stars. Went to the stars. It's inexplicable.